Now, the introduction I want to give to you today is relevant not only to Torah, but lahavdil to any study of any subject. When you have an entity that's made up of many parts and they form a whole, and then the question becomes whether each segment, each part, has significance unto itself and stands alone, or shall we say that since all these individual segments form an entity, a whole, you need all the segments and all the parts. And let's say whatever the number X of parts there are, you have to reach that number X because otherwise you won't have the whole. For example, and this is very famous, in Sfiras HaOmer, we have 49 days that we count. Each day is independent, but yet they form a whole. And that entity as a whole is the connection between Yitzias Mitzrayim and Kabbalas HaTorah, between Pesach and Shavuos. So the issue, and this is a great controversy in the poskim, is it absolutely critical that I count all 49 days so as to create this whole? Or even if I leave out a day here and a day there, I still have whatever days that I counted, and that's meaningful in and of itself. If I can give you a mashal, you could talk about a set of teeth, right? So if you're missing a few teeth here and there, you still have those teeth that you can use, but you don't have a full set of teeth. And so is true of the human body. The human body as an organism is made up of many, many different parts. And then the question becomes whether or not there's significance in and of itself to each part. Or to formulate it differently, can you have a full body without certain parts? Well, it's not full, but maybe it's almost full. And you can get, a certain element of significance for what you have. So in English, there's a phrase called all or nothing. Have you heard that? All or bust. In Hebrew, it's called hakol o lo klum. Everything or nothing. You've got to have it all. And this becomes very critical whenever there's a number. For example, in tzitzis, we have 4 corners. Let's say you have a beged that only has 3 corners and not 4. So you can't get 3/4 of a mitzvah of tzitzis. It's either all or nothing. And I'm giving you a method of lumdis that can be used systematically and consistently whenever you see a number. So, for example, the Torah gives us 10 dibros, aseres hadibros. What happens if you only have 9? Is it worth it? At least you have the significance of those 9, or no? It's an entity and a completion of 10. Or, for example, the Rambam has 13 Yesodei Hamuna tenets or principles of the faith. Let's say Ruvain believes in 12 out of 13. Can we give him credit for 12, or do we say no? Either you accept the whole or nothing but the whole. Now, in many cases, the halacha is willing to say rubo kikulo, which means if you have most and you have the majority, that's enough. It's as if you had the whole. But that really doesn't apply in a case where we're counting individual segments. Because in those cases, we're not going to apply the principle of rubo kikulo. We're not going to rely on majority because we need every last segment. So if you're voting, for example, in the Sanhedrin, and let's say you have 120 members of the court, or to be more precise, you have 71 members of the court, then you don't need every single member, but you need a majority, and a majority is sufficient. So by way of introduction, we now get into a very interesting issue that comes from our parsha, because the number 4 becomes very critical in our parsha. So if you have the first page here, page Zion of the Minchas Osher, you take a look at the pasuk in Parshas Va'era, Lachein Omar Emor L'Bnei Yisrael Ani Hashem. Now let's count. Who's going to help me count? V'hotzesi. Everyone say number 1, right? V'hotzesi. V'hotzesi eschem tachas sivlos Mitzrayim. Number 2. V'hitzalti eschem me'avodascham. Number 3. V'ga'alti eschem b'zor netuyiv shatum gedol. Number 4. V'lakachti eschem li la'am. So God takes us out of the suffering of Mitzrayim. He saves us from all the slavery. He redeems us with a stretched arm, and he takes us to the land and accepts us as his people. These are what's called the Arba Lishonos of Geula, otherwise known as the 4 expressions of redemption. There's actually a 5th one, but it's not counted, and that's Vehevesi, I will bring you to the land. Now, the Medrash says that this number 4 is very significant on the night of Pesach, when we commemorate and express our gratitude for the Almighty having redeemed us from slavery in Mitzrayim. And the number 4 corresponds to the 4 cups of wine that we drink on the night of the Seder. So that the Arba Kosos, as we call them, we'll go through them one by one in a second, actually parallel the 4 Lashonos of Geula. Now, these 4 Lashonos of Geula integrate to form one whole. And that whole is the complete redemption of the people of Israel from slavery. There are 4 different dimensions to that freedom. There's number 1, freedom from the suffering of Mitzrayim. Number 2, protection and sparing us from the labor in Mitzrayim. Number 3, the fact that God reveals himself to take us out of Mitzrayim. And number 4, the fact that God accepts us as his people. And these 4 elements of redemption form an entity, a whole on its own, but not each one individually. So just like we gave the example of a certain person who accepts 12 out of the 13 principles of the faith, well, guess what? He's missing a very critical element here, and therefore he doesn't have complete faith. So too, if he omits one of these dimensions of redemption, he doesn't have a complete gratitude or expressing his thanks for the redemption. And here we get into a major plugta, which means controversy amongst the poskim. What does a person do if he has only 3 cups of wine? Shall we say, and this is the first possibility, that at least let him drink 3 cups? That would be our knee-jerk, intuitive response. He gets 3 out of 4. What's wrong with getting 3 out of 4? Okay, you missed up on the 4th. You didn't have a 4th cup. At least you had 3. The other way of saying it is no, that whenever there's a number, that number must be achieved. It's absolutely critical. It's 4 or bust. And you can drink as much of the 3 cups of wine as you like, but that's not a mitzvah. It doesn't validate itself as a mitzvah because you've got to achieve the number 4, corresponding to the 4 dimensions of Geula. Now, below the pasuk on your page, you'll see a long statement in the Medrash Rabbah in which the Medrash expresses many other opinions as to why we drink 4 cups of wine on the Leil Seder. We're only familiar with one of those because that's the way it was accepted through Jewish tradition, that the 4 cups of wine correspond to the 4 Lashonos of Geula. But in fact, there are many, many other different opinions about the cups of wine. For example, HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises through his Nevi'im that ultimately he will destroy the evil in the world, and he will force the Rishoyim, the evildoers, to drink 4 cups of, shall we call it, poisonous wine. And we find this by Paro, again 4 times the word kos. And what's common to all these approaches, no matter what answer you'll come up with to the question, why do we drink 4 cups of wine? It's always going to come down to the number 4, which seems to indicate that the number 4 is critical. However, the Gemara says in Arvei Psachim, the last parak in Masechta Psachim, on Daf Kuf Vav, the Gemara says, Arba kosos tiknu lahem chachamim, which means that the Chachamim established 4 kosos. V'kol echad v'echad mitzvah bi'anpei nafshayhu, which translates as follows: each one of the 4 cups is a mitzvah unto itself, which seems to indicate that every time I drink a kos of the 4 kosos, I achieve that mitzvah. And therefore it would be meaningful in a case where I only have 3 kosos, or for that matter 1 kos, to drink whatever I have and fulfill whatever mitzvah I can. So it means that it's not true, according to the Gemara, that it's one mitzvah of drinking 4 kosos. No, it's 4 separate mitzvahs. Each cup of wine is a mitzvah unto itself, and he drinks that cup and he gets that mitzvah. Now we have to ask the question, what is the mitzvah of each kos? Okay? So see if you could give Moshe a little, hi Moshe, how you doing? Okay, good. Good. We need to give you a good, strong cup of wine to wake you up. Anyway, so now we're going to talk about the following. Now here, if you're not familiar with this and you don't know it by heart, then please write this down. The first of the 4 kosos is the kos of Kiddush. And basically that cup would apply any yontif or any Shabbos when we recite Kiddush. And the night of Pesach is no different, doesn't fall short of any other yontif, and it requires Kiddush. However, here we move on to the second kos, which is called the kos of Magid. Magid meaning the recitation of the Haggadah, the Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, in which we tell the whole story of the redemption from Egypt. At the conclusion of Magid, we drink the second kos of wine. Then we eat the Seudah, and at the conclusion of the Seudah, we bench. And when we recite Birkas HaMazon, we drink the 3rd cup of wine. And then we go on to Hallel, and at the conclusion of the recitation of Hallel, we will drink the 4th cup of wine. So the 4 cups are the following. Number 1 is the bracha of Kiddush. Number 2 is the bracha of Magid, which is Baruch Atah Hashem Goal Yisrael. Number 3 is the bracha of Birkas HaMazon, Azonas HaKol. And the 4th is the bracha on Hallel. Now, what's common to all of these 4 cups is they all correspond to a bracha. We have 4 brachos. Each bracha generates a kos, and each kos has its own bracha. To the extent to which the Gemara says, also in Arvei Psachim, Shesan b'vasachas, if he drinks all 4 cups, one after the other consecutively, meaning he didn't make the 4 brachos, he just drank 4 cups of wine. But he didn't have the bracha that applies to each one of the kosos. So the Gemara says the following. In such a case, Yedei cherus yotza, yedei dalid kosos lo yotza. And this Gemara is very enigmatic, very ambiguous. What does it mean that on the one hand, Yedei Cherus, he has demonstrated the freedom of Dalid Kosos, but on the other hand, Yedei Dalid Kosos Lo Yotz. He didn't fulfill the mitzvah Dalid Kosos. So here I want to share with you an insight that is published by the Brisker Rav Yitzchak Zev Halevi Soloveitchik. And in truth, the Chiddush that we're about to present, which is a very deep analysis of the mitzvah Daled Kosos, was really arrived at in a chevrusa between Rab Moshe Soloveitchik and his brother Rav Yitzchak Zev. So the two brothers were together on Pesach in a city called Chaslavich. Chaslavich is a town in White Russia where Rav Moshe Soloveitchik served as the Rav. The town itself, the Jewish community in Chaslavich, was Kulo Lubavitch. It was completely Lubavitcher Hasidim, but they had a Kabbalah tradition in Chaslavich that every Rav who would be appointed as the rabbi in that city would be a Litvak. And that's an interesting story unto itself. Maybe we'll talk about it later on if you like a good story. But be that as it may, on one particular Pesach, the Brisker Rav Yitzchak Zev Halevi, had to leave Brisk, and it had to do with a fire that broke out in the city of Brisk, and he came for Pesach to his brother's house in the town of Chaslavich. And there they worked on this Gemara about Yedei Cherus and Yedei Dalid Kosos, and they came up with the following insight. The mitzvah of Dalid Kosos has two different dimensions to it. So please listen carefully. The first dimension of Dalid Kosos is the actual bracha that you make on each kos, because we have a principle which is called kos shel bracha. Meaning, whenever we make a bracha in expression of thanks and gratitude to Hashem, we recite the bracha over a kos of yayin. For example, when a chassan marries a kala under the chuppah, they recite 7 brachos to express their gratitude to Hashem for having brought the chassan to the kala, and the kala to the chassan, and they drink wine. Another example would be, let's say, for example, Shechiyanu. You recite Shechiyanu over a kos shel bracha. Another example would be Kiddush. On Friday night, we recite Kiddush, and we thank Hashem for giving us the sanctity of the Shabbos, and we do so over a cup of wine. And last but not least, we have an example of Birchas, what did I leave out? So we mentioned Hallel, we mentioned Kiddush, we mentioned Birchas Hamazon, we mentioned Birchas Nesuin under the Chuppah. Anybody come up with any other examples of a kos shel bracha? I think that covers most of it.
After Birchas Hamazon?
Birchas Hamazon, correct, we said that.
Havdalah?
Havdalah, excellent. Another case. Havdalah, beautiful. Havdalah is another example of a kos shel bracha over a cup of wine. Now, on the night of Pesach, we recite 4 brachos. We have the bracha of Kiddush, the bracha of Magid, the bracha of Birkas Hamazon, and the bracha of Hallel. Each bracha requires a cup of wine. So basically, we have 4 brachos, 4 cups of wine, and each kos is a kos shel bracha. So far, so good? Did I miss a punchline here? Okay. Then we have another dimension to the mitzvah of Daled Kosos, and that's called cherus. Cherus means that at least in those times, maybe even today, a person gets out of slavery, gets out of jail, he's freed from slavery. He drinks a cup of wine as a celebration to express his cherus. And the Gemara tells us, with regard to the night of Pesach, Chayav Adam laharos es atzmo ki'ilu hu yotza miMitzrayim. A person has to sort of live out as if he himself went out of slavery, so he drinks wine. And since the redemption took place in 4 different parts, and those are the 4 Lashonos of Geula that we spoke about, therefore he's got to drink 4 cups of wine derech cherus. Now, what he did is, shesan b'vasachas, he poured 4 cups of wine, they're all in front of him on the table, and he drank one after the other without making the brachos. He did not recite the Haggadah, he did not recite Birkas Hamazon nor Hallel, he just simply drank 4 cups of wine. Yidei Cherus Yotza, he has fulfilled the mitzvah of Cherus because he demonstrated that he's a Ben Chorin 4 times over by drinking 4 cups of wine, but he forfeits the mitzvah of Dalid Kosel Shel Bracha, because for Dalid Kosel Shel Bracha, he needs a bracha for each kos, which he didn't have. The Gemara goes on to say that if he drinks Yayin Chai, which we'll explain what that means, Chai Chet Yud, then Yedei Dalid Kosel Yotza, Yedei Cherus Lo Yotza. Now, what is Yayin Chai? In the old times, they used to have concentrated wine. And then they would dilute the wine, usually a ratio of 3 cups of water to 1 cup of wine, of undiluted wine. And that was derech cherus. In other words, a Ben Chorin wouldn't drink, concentrated wine. It's, not very tasty or healthy for the body. So that's not cherus. You don't demonstrate cherus by drinking yain chai, but yedei dalid kosos yotza, meaning he has dalid kosos shel bracha, because yain chai is sufficient for a kos shel bracha. It's not derech cherus. Now let's introduce one other concept, and then we move on. And that is Chamar Medina. You've probably heard of it. I don't know if you've ever seen anyone make Havdalah on, shall I say, Coca-Cola or something, freshly squeezed orange juice. Instead of Bar Priya Gofni makes a shahakal. So that's called Chamar Medina. Chamar Medina means like the very significant drink of that particular society. Now, for a koshel bracha, like for example Havdalah that we mentioned, a Chamar Medina would be sufficient. You could be Yotzei your mitzvah of koshel bracha even on Chamar Medina. That's what I mentioned to you before about Havdalah, that you may have witnessed in your lifetime, Havdalah over, again, I'm just using an example of let's say, freshly squeezed orange juice. However, on the night of Pesach, there are 2 dimensions to the mitzvah. The mitzvah doesn't reduce itself simply to koshel bracha times 4, but the mitzvah is derech cherus. Derech cherus requires yayin. And as we said, diluted wine, that tastes very good. But Coca-Cola just won't do it for you. There's no Chamar Medina. It's got to be yayin. So derech cherus, to demonstrate that we are now freed slaves, that requires yayin. Okay. Now we get to the main question of tonight. Does every single person at the Seder table have to have his or her own cup of wine and drink his own cup of wine? So let's take Kiddush on Leil Shabbos or any Yontif as our paradigmic case. On a Friday night Kiddush, we have a minhag of giving out Kiddush, right? Everybody gets a little bit of wine or grape juice or whatever it is. But according to the strict letter of the law, that's not necessary because Kiddush is a koshel bracha. And with regard to a koshel bracha, all you have to do is hear the bracha from the Makadesh, and you fulfill your obligation of bracha through a principle called shomea ka'ona, that listening as if you added it, you responded yourself. Because in koshel bracha, shtia, meaning drinking, is not an integral part of the mitzvah. But what would you say about Daled Kosos on Leil Pesach? Would it be enough if one person had Daled Kosos, he would recite the 4 brachos, each in its time, proper time. The rest of the Mesubin, all those at the table will hear the bracha. They'll say Amen, or they won't say Amen. They'll just listen. And they don't have to drink the cups of wine. What would you say?
For the shabracha, yes, but for the cheres, no.
Excellent, beautiful. Are you? For the koshel bracha, well, yeah, you heard the bracha, and then you were yotze with the bracha. The shtia is not significant. It's not a critical part of the mitzvah. The mitzvah is reciting a bracha over a kos. And every person at the table, in effect, through the principle of Shomea Kona, has recited his own bracha on the kos. Somebody has to drink from the kos because otherwise it's not considered that the bracha was made on the kos. But there's no chovas gavra for each individual to drink from the kos, but not so on Leil HaPesach, because Leil HaPesach, the Daled Kosos, is derech cherus. You can't demonstrate cherus on my behalf. I must demonstrate cherus personally by drinking the cup of wine, times 4. So if you take a look at Nefesh Harav for a moment, and you'll see a page on the bottom right that says Kuf Pei Daled. Be'inyan Daled Kosos. I'm not going to read every word because it'll be a little bit too tedious, but I'll tell you the background. We said before that in a certain period of time, the Jews had to leave the city of Brisk, either because of the fire that broke out in Brisk, or maybe because the Russian soldiers were persecuting Jews. And they came to a different part of Russia, to a city of Chaslavich. And there the Brisker Rav and Rav Moshe, his older brother, were working together on trying to figure out the nature of the mitzvah of Daled Kosos. And that's when they came up with this fantastic chiddush that there are 2 different dimensions to Daled Kosos. There's the koshel bracha and there's the derech cherus, the siyas hakos. What was the issue? The issue was that in Chaslavich, they didn't have an ample supply of wine to guarantee that everyone at the Seder table would have his own Daled Kosos. And basically, they only had 1 set of Daled Kosos per family. So no matter how many members you were in the family, you could have a family of 25 members, it's irrelevant. There were only 4 cups of wine. So obviously, the leader of the Seder is going to recite his Daled Kosos Shel Bracha over the 4 kosos. And in that sense, we don't have a kiyum, we don't have a mitzvah of derech cherus because only 1 person drank Daled Kosos. So the question came up, should we at least try to supply the other members of the family with Chamar Medina? In those days, Chamar Medina was called Razhenka wine, raisin wine. They used to make a wine out of raisins. They would soak raisins, probably in hot water, and they created some sort of a raisin wine, which had a very significant status over there in that part of the world. It was called Chamar Medina. So here's the question that came up. Should we supply every member of the household with Dalid kosos of raisin wine? Because the Ramah in Shulchan Aruch, which you'll see about 10 lines down from the top of the paragraph, you should underline these words. The Ramah is in Orach Chaim Siman Tov Pei Gimel. Di'im ein yayin, if there's no wine, he says you can take Chamar Medina for Dalid kosos. Wow. You can have Chamar Medina for Dalid kosos. I was always wondering whether milk has the status of Chamar Medina, because I remember a story that I was raised on, that once a man came to visit his Rebbe, the Beis Halevi, Rabbi Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik. If you heard of the Beis Halevi, that was my Rebbe's great-grandfather. And he asked him the following question. He says, I don't have wine. Can I be Yotzei the mitzvah Dalid Kosos on milk? So at that point, Rav Soloveitchik, the Beis Halevi, went back and he took 10 rubles and he gave it to this man, because he realized this man can't afford to buy wine. After the man left, the Beis Halevi's Rebbitzin came over to him and said, Rebbe, I don't get it. Why did you give the man 10 rubles? I mean, you could get a cup of wine for 1 ruble. Mine times 4 is 4 rubles. Why'd you give him 10 rubles? So listen to the Beis Halevi's answer. He said, if he's drinking milk at the Seder table, it means he doesn't have any chicken or meat. I had to give him another 6 rubles so that he could buy some meat for the Seder table. I mean, this story is so illustrative of the fact that a Rebbe, goes way beyond the original question. He sees something, he perceives something beyond what's officially, on the table. So now again, getting back to this Ramah, the Ramah says that in event that there's no Dalid Kosos Shel Yayin, we take Chamar Medina instead. So he'll recite Kiddush on Chamar Medina, he'll recite Birchas HaMagid on, and so forth and so on. So therefore, the 2 brothers, the Rav of Chaslavich, Rav Moshe, and his brother, Rav Yitzchak Zev, the Rav of Brisk, wanted to know, in this case where each family would only be supplied with 4 cups of wine, should we supply everyone at the table with 4 cups of Chamar Medina? Because Ramah says if you don't have wine, then you use Chamar Medina. So Rabbosai, what would you say, if I would have asked you this question, what would have been your intuitive response?
Yes.
Again, I give you the facts on the table one more time. Let's go over it. The Ramah says if you don't have Dalid Kosos, then you use Chamar Medina, 4 cups of Chamar Medina. Now the question is, we only have 4 cups of wine for one person who's going to lead the Seder and make all the brachos. Should we supply the other members of the family with Chamar Medina? What would you say?
Yeah.
Yes.
Was that a yes?
Yes.
Well, all those who say yes, raise their hand. Oh, I only see 2 hands. Oh, now I see a couple of fingers coming in. Okay. So Rav Moshe and Rav Velvel came to the conclusion that no, it's absolutely pointless to give Chamar Medina to the other members of the family. Why? Because as far as Koshel Brach is concerned, they were Yotzei with the leader of the Seder who recited the 4 brachos, and each one he drank from the wine. Ella what? They're missing the mitzvah of derech cheres. You don't gain anything by giving them Chamar Medina, because Chamar Medina is not a fulfillment of the mitzvah of derech cheres. Okay, now did everybody follow that, or you want me to repeat that one more time? Okay, I think you followed. Now, on the bottom right of the same page, another fascinating issue came up. The Rambam Shita in Perikov Tes Milchas Shabbos is that, it's based on a Gemara Bava Basra, that the only wine that you could use for Kiddush, I'm talking about Kiddush the whole year round, is Yayin Haroy L'Naseach Al Gabi Mizbeach. As you know, many of the Karbanos, most of the Karbanos, were accompanied by Yayin for Nisuch, what they call in English libations. I don't like that word, but anyway, that's the English translation. Now, with regard to Yayin for Nisuch, there are certain requirements. Not every Yayin qualifies for the mitzvah of Nisuch HaYayin. And it's notable that there are two categories of wine that are excluded, that are disqualified for the mitzvah of Yayin, of Nisuch HaYayin. One is what's called Yayin Mevushal. Mevushal literally translates as cooked. It's probably more accurate to translate as pasteurized. And they would put the wine after, it came down, from the press that pressed the grapes. They would put the wine over heat, and that's called Yayin Mevushal. That wine is disqualified from the Mizbeach, from the Nisuch HaYayin Al Gabi Mizbeach. The second category is called Yayin Kanditon. Here in modern Israel, there's something called Yayin Kanditon. Yayin Kanditon means yayin that's mixed with sugar. They add sugar to the wine to get it sweet. That wine, which is Yayin Shel Kanditon, cannot be used on the Mizbeach. The Rambam says that therefore Kiddush has the same requirements as Yayin Lemizbeach, and therefore you cannot fulfill your mitzvah of Kiddush neither with Yayin Mevushal nor with Yayin Shel Kanditon. So sweet wines, according to the Rambam, as opposed to dry wines, are excluded and disqualified from Kiddush. Number two, according to the Rambam, if you have pasteurized yayin, like for example, grape juice is pasteurized, you cannot use that for Kiddush. I'm just reminding myself now, as we're speaking, of a good buddy of mine who was a student of mine many, many years ago in Mivaseret by the name of Uri Pilichowski. If you ever, I'll send you a video that he just made recently, exceptional video. He works for an organization called Nefesh Bin Nefesh, if you ever heard of it. Anyway, so Uri has his bottle of wine, which he guards very carefully. That wine he uses for Kiddush is the wine that the Rambam would validate for the mitzvah of Kiddush. Not too many people are so mocked. But as a general rule, if you use dry wine, which is not pasteurized, and there's no sugar added, so it's not Yayin Mevushal, and it's not Yayin Shel Kanditon, you're okay even according to the Rambam. Now, we get to the Leil HaSeder. What happens on the Leil HaSeder? We're up to the first kos. The first kos is called what? Who remembers? Kiddush, right? It's a kos of Kiddush. Now, this man wants to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush the way the Rambam formulates the mitzvah of Kiddush. Means he's got to have yayin that's roy lemizbeach, roy lenisuch. However, on the left page, which is called Kuf Pei Hey, the Yushalmi says that you can fulfill the mitzvah of Dalid Kosos with Yayin Mevushal and Yayin Shel Kanditon. What's going on over here? How could it be that the first kos, which is the kos shel Kiddush, and the Rambam disqualifies Kanditon and Mevushal, could be kosher for the mitzvah of Dalid Kosos? The answer is for Cherus. Eino Chinami. The first kos has a double personality. on the one hand, it is a kosher kiddush, and for sure he's not going to be yotze the mitzvah of kiddush according to the Rambam with this yayin kanditon or yayin mevushal. But on the other hand, this first kos wears a different hat. It's also part of the mitzvah of drinking daled kosos. So as a kosher bracha, it's a kosher kiddush. But as a kos of cherus, it's one of 4 kosos of cherus. And therefore the Yerushalmi says that if he has yayin kanditon or yayin mevushal, he can fulfill the mitzvah of derech cherus. Because the fact that the yayin is mevushal, or it has sugar added to it, only enhances the wine. It makes it even more tasty, long-lasting. Certainly it expresses and demonstrates cherus, so therefore it could be yotze the mitzvah of cherus. Now here's the question. I see we're running out of time, so I'll make it really quick. The question is, what happens if the Makadesh has the right wine, meaning the wine that's not mevushal and it's not kanditon, no sugar added, and he could be yotze the mitzvah of kiddush and daled kosos, derech cherus, with his 4 cups of wine? What about the other members of the family? Do they also fulfill their mitzvah of the first cup of wine by listening to the bracha of the Makadesh? And then they go ahead and they drink yayin kanditon. And here the answer is going to be that they're yotze the mitzvah of kosher bracha, and they yotze the mitzvah of derech cherus. They get both mitzvahs. Why? Because as far as kosher bracha is concerned, the mitzvah of kiddush they fulfilled by listening to the kiddush of the Makadesh, and he recited the kiddush over yayin that was not mevushal and it was not kanditon. As far as derech cherus and shtia is concerned, they could be yotze, as we saw in the Yerushalmi, with yayin kanditon or yayin mevushal. So no matter how you slice the cake or how you drink the wine, they are fulfilling the mitzvah and both dimensions of the mitzvah of daled kosos. The last discussion, which we don't have time for today, is whether or not you should drink less than 4 kosos. Is it 4 or bust? Or each one of the daled kosos stands on its own? And once again, we might differentiate between the 2 dimensions of daled kosos. As far as kosher bracha is concerned, well, each kos is a separate entity, and it's a separate bracha. So as many kosos as he can come up with, that's how many kosos he should drink. But as far as derech cherus is concerned, here we're not sure. It might be that to demonstrate cherus, you got to drink 4 cups of wine that parallel and correspond to the daled lashonos of Giul. If there are any questions, I'm here. And I want to wish you, first of all, thank you for coming and setting up this Zoom, and have a great time on the Tiyul. Please send me a couple of pictures if you can, post it on our group.
Thank you, Rav. Thank you, Rav.
Okay, thank you so much. Bye-bye.
So much.